Welcome to this session on social relationships and emotional design. My name is Monica Bordegoni. I am a professor at the School of Design at Politecnico di Milano, and at the moment I am in Milano. I think all of you are in different places. So I will briefly introduce the topic, which is really very interesting, and it has to do with humans. So it's a session rich of studies about humans. And there are common, I would say, topics that are addressed by your presentations that are social behavior, behavioral change, and emotions, and even the future, which is really very interesting. So in this session, we have 5 papers. The first one is about shame in design strategies. So we are used to hear about good moods. And in this case, we talk about shame, which is a little bit unusual and very interesting. The presentation is given by Jun Kyung Trondsen. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. She is a PhD candidate at the Department of Design at NTNU Norwegian University of Science and Technology. The second paper is about intercultural meaningful social interactions. Interactions among people is very topical in product design and service design also. And the talk is given by María Laura Ramírez. She's a doctoral candidate in the program of Design, Technology and Society at Koç University in Turkey. The third one is about assessing social behavior. Again, social behavior is central in this session. And the presentation is made by Muriel de Boeck, and she is a PhD student in product development at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. The fourth presentation is outside Europe, and this is given by Akira Ito. He is a master's student in the Tokyo Institute of Technology in Japan. I guess Akira is in Japan at the moment. And it's about insight generation that we can use in design. The last presentation is very challenging and inspiring because it's about opening futures. The presentation is given by Arturo Ortega Alvarado, and he is a PhD candidate in design for sustainability at the Department of Design, Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So I propose that we start playing the pre-recorded presentations all together, one after another. You can write any question that you may have in the chat. And at the end, after the presentations, we can have an overall discussion, including question and answers. Okay.
Hi, my name is June Kyung Trondsen. I'm a PhD candidate from the Design Department at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And today I'll give you a brief summary of the article titled Exploring the Role of Shame in Design Strategies, written by me together with Casper, who's a professor at the same department. Shame, embarrassment, taboo, and stigma. Although well hidden in most societies, these are all concepts most of us are familiar with, and almost a natural part of our everyday life. We blush when confronted with embarrassing discussion topics, wrinkle our nose in disgust, feel guilty for doing something bad, and shameful when our wrongdoings are made visible to others. On the bright side, we also indulge ourselves with guilty pleasures, laugh at awkward movie scenes and satirical jokes. We entertain our friends with embarrassing stories and feel a sense of excitement when a dirty secret is about to be revealed. For the rest of this presentation, I'll attempt to capture some of these experiences and visualize how emotions such as embarrassment, guilt, and shame affect us in more tangible ways. Besides a personal understanding of these emotions, they also play a role in society, as they often afford pro-social behavior. Shame also seems to have had a revitalization in the recent years, together with social media and a rising concern for social challenges and the environment. COVID shame, green shaming, cancel culture, and hashtag activism are some keywords that most of you might recognize. Seeing how shame can have a great impact on behavior, it seems highly relevant for designers to better understand the social mechanisms of shame. Although design literature have had a strong tradition for working with positive emotions, which appear in a large variety and are extensively used as a design tool, negative emotions, and in particular shame, seems to have been treated with less nuance and granularity compared to their positive counterparts. Other disciplines, including psychology, sociology, and ethnography, have developed a variety of theories and frameworks for shame. Without going into too much details, this presentation treats the notion of shame as a self-conscious moral emotion, with a strong social component and closely connected to its siblings, embarrassment, and guilt, including social concepts such as taboo, ostracism, and stigma, and using a review of scientific, artistic, activist, and popular culture sources. The next slides will illustrate 5 possible ways for how shame can be used in design interventions. Guilty pleasure, schadenfreude, dirty secrets, risk behavior, and dark comedy are all notions which show how negative and positive emotions can pose dilemmas and conflicting desires. This concept of mixed emotions has been researched in advertising and design for its ability to create positive and rich experiences. One commercial example is Cards Against Humanity. It's a popular but controversial card game that takes advantage of mixed emotions by allowing its players to express taboo humor. Although many design approaches utilize persuasive techniques, which often rely on increasing gratification to the individual in performing behaviors, some corners of design and marketing point out the aversive effect of shame, guilt, and embarrassment in response to promoted pro-social behavior change. Some studies show that shame-inducing messages can be useful to leverage social influence, discouraging unhealthy behaviors, and promote green-based consumption. But shame-induced messages can also have the opposite effect. The examples on this slide show how shame can also create certain forms of attraction through the use of embarrassing humor, sexual innuendos, or, as the parental advisory label indicates, as a forbidden fruit. As opposed to emphasizing shame to make products or messages more interesting, reducing undesirable shaming is also used as a strategy to create attraction. Humor can be used as a coping mechanism and as a strategy to attenuate the negative effects of shame and increase message persuasion. It's not uncommon to see stylization as means to soften taboos with intimate care products, or neatly designed assistive or medical products which aim to reduce shame and avoid eliciting stigma. As today's design practice is much concerned with social issues, others have also investigated taboos as a powerful tool to make discourses explicit, afford critical reflection, and to gauge user audience. Such critical expressions of social discrimination and unjust shame are also evident in sub-areas of design, such as critical design, design activism, discursive design, and social design. Gender-neutral toilet signs, the Android chair, the Free the Nipple campaign, and the Riot Pant project are all examples of design activism in response to sex and gender discrimination. As presented, shame can come in many nuances and disguises, and have been discussed in many corners of design, as well as in marketing, art, and environmental studies. From design literature concerning pleasurable product experience, to literature emphasizing the social aspects of design, There are explicit and implicit signs of shame playing an important role in identifying challenges, opportunities, room for empathy, as well as critical thinking. Seeing that shame can both be added and removed in different contexts to both create aversion and attraction. Experimenting with these mechanisms in different contexts could be a fruitful way to start exploring this emotion in a much more designedly way. In addition, increased awareness of public shaming, a new focus on shame in domains such as mental health care and sustainability, suggests that there's a higher demand for designers to gain insights and intervene in areas where shame is non-avoidable.
Hello everyone, I am María Laura and I'm a doctoral candidate in the program of Design, Technology and Society at Coşkun University. And today I will present a summary of our paper which presents design strategies to promote intercultural meaningful social interaction. So first of all, what are intercultural meaningful social interactions? So these are interactions that are held between individuals that are strangers to each other, which are perceived to be from a different culture, but anyway, interactions that are memorable, positive, and that leave an impact on individuals. So these interactions are relevant because they can promote social cohesion and diversity in society, and therefore promote social integration of different cultural groups to the same society. However, these interactions present additional barriers to be held, as language barrier, mistrust, potential biases. There can be a lack of opportunity and also lack of time, which is a problem in any kind of big city. How is design related to this problem? This is mostly based on design's quality of turning current situation into preferred ones. So design can be used to encourage or disencourage certain behaviors. Though previous work on design for behavior change has examined how design can encourage healthy and sustainable behaviors and even create empathy, we have not found studies that explore how to promote intercultural meaningful social interactions, which is the focus of the present study. So to do so, we were inspired by bridging concepts which represent intermediary knowledge between design theory and practice. And to build these bridging concepts, we explored theories for prejudice reduction as the start of our theoretical grounding. So therefore, we conducted a literature review on social psychology theories, looking at, for example, intergroup contact theory, which expresses that bringing members of different social groups into contact can decrease or improve their intergroup relations if the interactions are positive. Social identity and categorization theories that explain that individuals categorize themselves according to previous experiences, expectations, motivations, and goals. We also explored how emotions can affect cognition and stereotypes. So targeting emotions is proposed as a way to manipulate the expression of prejudices. And finally, we also looked at self-affirmation theory, which predicts that people discriminate against each other to affirm themselves, their identity, when they feel threatened. So this theoretical grounding was complemented by participant-situated knowledge being part of these interactions. And to gather this knowledge, we conducted a focus group in collaboration with an NGO that works to promote social integration of migrants. And we discussed about their previous experiences being part of this interaction. So by analyzing participants' discussion, we identified 5 characteristics that made intercultural interactions meaningful. So first, we found that these interactions have a mutuality component in what people think, feel, and show of themselves. There was also a belonging component, which was related to being part of the moment that they were living and to the group that they were with. Also, there was a component related to learning and reshaping individual's identity. There was also a certain level of confidence in which participants explained that they feel safer when they were part of these interactions compared to interactions in which they might feel judged or threatened. And also, there was a connectedness component, which was related to different interests, experiences, and thoughts that participants share. By linking these different bodies of knowledge, we articulated 8 design strategies. And here you can see that each strategy is linked to both theory and practice. So facilitating empathy refers to exploring ways of enhancing the gathering of insights about the life of people that were from a different social, economic, or cultural group. Syncing feelings refer to exploring ways for people to feel the exact same thing at the exact same moment. Supporting understanding refers to exploring ways to create awareness and tolerance of each other's actions, cultures, and beliefs. Boosting confidence refers to exploring ways of increasing individuals' self-appreciation and self-compassion so they do not feel threatened by others. Nudging positive experiences refers to exploring ways to extend a positive mindset and attitudes towards those who are perceived as different. Experiencing together refers to exploring ways to nudge intercultural people to perform activities together. Encouraging cross-learning refers to exploring ways to support people learning something new about another person's culture and their beliefs, and therefore producing a cultural exchange. And finally, identifying similarities refers to exploring ways to show people that they are connected through obvious or unexpected similarities. So then, after articulating these strategies, we transpassed them into cards to perform a preliminary evaluation, and we organized ideation workshops with 8 designers that were focusing on how 2 characters from different cultures could meaningfully meet in a public place of their choice. So each designer was assigned with one of the strategies and received the same challenge and same characters. So to evaluate whether the strategies could be helpful to inspire new ideas, we assessed designers' comments and ideas they generated in the workshop, and overall we observed that the strategies helped to boost divergent design solutions at the same time that they allowed designers to converge around the initial challenge of promoting intercultural meaningful social interactions. And finally, that these strategies allowed designers to explore additional paths for design beyond empathy, which is the strategy that most interventions rely on. Finally, future work for us focuses on iterating and improving the tools that we created and applying these to facilitate the application of these strategies in the design process and exploring what kind of ideas they inspire in different contexts and settings. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Hello everybody, my name is Muriel de Boek and I'm a PhD student at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. The subject of my research is human augmentation, which is a research field that studies wearable products that aim to improve human abilities. My promoter is Professor Kristof, whose expertise lies in inclusive design and sigma-free design. I started my PhD in October 2020, and so far I've studied literature, and currently I'm working on my research and methodology. And what I've discovered while reviewing the literature and how I'm going to implement that knowledge into my research, I'm about to tell you in this presentation. The aim of this study was to investigate how social behavior towards users of wearable products can be assessed, this ultimately to provide useful insights for product designers. We tried to do so by addressing the following research objectives. The first objective was to provide the reader with a theoretical framing regarding non-verbal behavior types that are essential when studying social behavior, followed by an overview of research methods that aim to assess social behavior towards near-body product users that we find in the literature. Approaching the matter from a product design perspective, this study is mainly intended for designers of wearable products who wish to gain more insight in the social behavior towards their product proposals. Against this background, the overview of methods will not provide the designer with an answer to whether their product will be socially accepted or rejected. However, these methods can be valuable in comparing several conceptual products or to justify certain design decisions. An important choice to make when studying social behavior is to determine the setting of the study. Laboratory studies have the advantage of greater control of variables that might influence the results. Researchers often prefer the laboratory design to the field because of problems with informed consent and privacy of the participants. The main advantage of field research is its generalizability to real-life contexts because they represent a greater variety of situations and environments that subjects experience in their natural habitats. Although laboratory research can be valid to measure social aspects, many types of biases and subjective interpretation can manifest. For these reasons, we chose to focus on research methods in natural environments, or as we refer to it, in the wild. With various approaches to behavioral reactions, it's relevant to address the distinction between reflexive and thoughtful reactions. Whereas a thoughtful reaction is a powerful single feeling state, a reflexive reaction can occur unconsciously in the first microseconds of thoughts. This implies that when we encounter things or events we have never come across before, we start either liking or disliking it, which in turn manifests itself in our behavior. Reflexive reactions implicitly reveal someone's attitude and social motives that are unlikely to emerge within artificial environments, highlighting the importance of assessing in the wild. Accordingly, reactions induced during unexpected encounters, thus without subjects knowing that they are being studied to prevent biases and preserve real behavior, were at the basis of this study. Additionally, research has shown that social behavior is profoundly affected by our emotions. As such, people make sense of each other according to two fundamental dimensions of social perception, warmth and competence. Whereas the warmth dimension reflects on people's friendliness, the competence dimension considers their ability. A psychological link exists between positive or negative feelings and approach or avoidance tendencies. We tend to avoid people whom we evaluate negatively and approach people whom we evaluate positively, or in other words, proxemic behavior. In order to measure social behavior in the wild, we need to explore nonverbal behavior more closely. The three main aspects of nonverbal communication are kinesics, which is the use of body language, proxemics, the use of distance, and haptics, the use of touch. Within the purpose of this article, we will only address research methods assessing kinesic and proxemic behavior, as communication by touch is rather unlikely to occur when encountering someone unfamiliar. First, we have kinesic behavior, also known as body language, which is body motion communication such as facial expressions, posture, eye movements, gestures, and other nonverbal behavior related to movement of any part of the body. As already mentioned, proxemic behavior means that we tend to avoid others whom we evaluate negatively and approach people whom we evaluate positively. Therefore, proxemic measurements may reveal responses that people do not want to report or cannot consciously access. Here you can see the overview of research methods found in the literature to assess kinesic and proxemic behavior in the wild. We searched for methods that were applied in studies of various research domains, but which could also be applicable in a product design context. Because the search for methods was very wide-ranging, the overview is not supposed to be exhaustive. Our intention was to give an idea of potential contemporary research methods. Because of the time limit, I will now discuss just a few methods in more detail. A first example of a method to measure kinesic behavior is automated software for facial expression recognition. FaceReader, for example, is software designed to measure emotional facial expressions through the detection and modeling of the face and classifying the facial expressions. Although the software is very easy to use, the subject must face the camera and only a small angle of rotation is allowed. A second example of a method to measure kinesic behavior is the assessment of staring behavior, which implies the moment of detection and the number of times passers-by look back over their shoulder. These variables provide insight in whether passers-by give notice to the near-body product user and how fast. Early detection could be an indication of increased interest, vigilance, and alertness. An example of a method to measure proxemic behavior is interpersonal distance using overhead camera images. A passerby that maintains a greater, safer walking distance could be an indication of alertness or self-protection of the passerby. Moreover, measuring interpersonal distance can also be conducted in an automated manner through ultrasonic sensors. Lastly, Bluetooth beacons also allow proximity determination and can even enable ranging to determine the relative distance to the near body product user. Thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Akira from Tokyo Institute of Technology. In this presentation, I will talk about the types of thinking processes during empathy, which should be avoided when gaining insights. Here is the abstract. In the design process, it is not clear how insight is gained through empathy. There are frameworks and models for the empathy process and gaining insights, but often they are proposed separately. Therefore, it is essential to evaluate the whole process and identify good and bad characteristics. We use the coding to visualize the thinking process of 16 participants when generating a problem definition statement, usually called an insight statement. As a result, we identified 3 thinking patterns that should be avoided in the thinking process when creating insight statements. The importance of insight in the design process is well known. Kolko defines insight as a clear, deep, and meaningful perception of a particular design context, and the empathy for the user is important in the thinking process. With that definition in mind, an insight statement can be defined as a statement that expresses the true needs of the user. In the design process, a good insight statement can lead to the proposal of creative solution for the user. Up until now, empathy and insight have been studied separately. Copley's figure shows the 4 steps of empathy based on how the designer interacts with the user. According to Kolko, designers generate insights not only by understanding the user, but also by using their own knowledge and experience, which in turn lead to deeper perception of the user. Thus, theoretical frameworks exist. However, it is not clear how designers should emphasize with the user to generate insights. This research aims to answer the following question. What is the difference between thinking processes that result in good insight statements and those that result in bad insight statements? Here is how we conducted our experiment. We asked 60 participants to work on the specific design task. We asked them to draw concept maps to visualize what they were thinking and how they expanded their thoughts. We gave them a template for insight statement, which was, someone needs something because blah blah blah. We analyzed their concept maps and insight statements using the following steps. First, we categorize each node in the concept maps and the relationship between the nodes. Meanwhile, the 2 evaluators were asked to evaluate the insight statements were on a 5-point scale, and to clarify the evaluation criteria, we interviewed them and asked them what influenced their evaluation. Then, we compared the thinking process leading to an insight statement evaluated as good and those leading to ones evaluated as bad. Here's the result. These are coded concept maps of some of the participants. As you can see, we can easily recognize the features of the thinking process and compare them with each other. From concept map A, we can see that participant 5 generates insight statements by quoting information written in the interview transcript. Concept map B shows that participant 9 makes a guess first and then quotes user information or suggests ideas to match the guess. This shows that participant 1 just suggests ideas. This shows that participant 4 guesses result by thinking divergently. I will start the discussion by discussing the results of the insight statement evaluation. The evaluators mentioned that they evaluate the insight statements based on these 3 criteria: point of view, context, and expression. Point of view represents the focus of the needs or problems. Context represents how well the user is understood, and expression is simply a measure of how well the statement is expressed. These criteria are directly related to these steps in the design task: starting point, development, and organization. We name these steps sensing, recognition, and expression. In addition, each step corresponds to the procedure of empathy described by Coprey. Through comparison of thinking processes with each other, we categorize the thinking processes as shown in this figure. The vertical axis is the quality of the insight statement, which represents how highly an insight statement is evaluated. The horizontal axis represents the reasons behind the designers gaining insight statements based on the interview transcript, personal and professional experiences. Overall, we identify 3 types of thinking processes, which lead to insight statements evaluated as bad. Superficial is a type of thinking process that is biased towards user information and leads to insight statements that defines user needs superficially. Preconception is a type of thinking process that is biased towards one's knowledge and experience and leads to insight statements that define user needs based on assumptions. Unrepresented is a type of thinking process that has a good balance of I saw and I know, but is poorly expressed and not well evaluated. This table shows the feature of each thinking process in 3 stages that we defined earlier: sensing, recognition, and expression. Superficial thinking process started with a quote from the interview transcript, developed the thinking with only quotes, and the insight statement only points out superficial problems and needs. Preconception can be classified into 2 types. One starts with ideas and guesses and ends up with the proposal of specific solutions. The other starts with a quote, but divergently guesses the user's situation and results in an insight statement that is out of context. Unrepresented process, while well-balanced in their organization of information, fail to point out the real problems or true needs in the insight statement. I will summarize my presentation. We verified the 3 thinking processes that should be avoided to gain insight: superficial, preconception, and unrepresented. These thinking processes are defined based on how the information is biased and how the insight statement is organized. Avoiding thinking patterns like these is important for gaining insights. However, we are still unsure how to define a good insight statement or what characteristics of a thinking process lead to a good insight statement. Further research is required to clarify them.
Hi, I will start by positioning myself and my research. My name is Isaac, and I'm a PhD candidate in Design for Sustainability in the Department of Design at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Although I'm in a design department, most of my research uses methods and approaches from social sciences. The title of my paper is An Exploration of Some Aspects to Consider When Opening Futures. This paper comes as a byproduct of my research, so here I'm putting bits of information that appear disconnected. I will follow the contents according to the paper's order. So I move now to the introduction. Is the future something that designers can open? According to Escobar's argument, design presents an opportunity to help people regain their ability to see and make otherwise, so as to make plural futures again possible. Escobar goes deeper into a design ontology based on relationality between autonomy and interdependencies, in opposition to individualism and competence, where design could play a transitional role in repairing the damaged web of life relations. Taking this prescription of a new design, I decided to connect it to already existing literature of design, which could evidence, 1, that design futuring practices are already assessed under some standard, and 2, that there are practical implications for designers wanting to open futures. I intended to do a narrative literature review, which is not a systemic approach. However, it was coupled with thoughts and ideas resulting from a more extensive literature review about the future and design that I had been engaging in. Anyway, my point with this review was to capture some of the essential aspects designers should consider when engaging in opening futures. This is not coming from a desire to to change design, but from the realization that a lot of these elements are already found in literature that many others have discussed, researched, and documented broadly in design, sometimes in a fragmented way. I begin by looking at the state of the art of futuring in design discourse. It generally involves denunciation for being acritical and closing the opportunities to specific technical and commercial developments, lock-ins, while at the same time destroying the opportunities for plural futures. A fierce realization is that design can create both the means to open and close the future, because all design efforts create a landscape for what may or may not come after. So the question is, how do designers avoid colonizing or controlling the future? And here I mean the professionally trained designers, not any human exerting an attitude towards change. An essential part of looking at design as an opportunity to open plural futures is an acceptance that designers have no control over the outcome. The effects of what is designed and put into the world cannot always be anticipated. Thus, even designers offering solutions to problems must accept that their work is not on offering solutions, but instead in showing possibilities. But showing possibilities should not be reduced to the introduction of artifacts. For designers to open futures, it is necessary to gain acquaintance with the many happenings outside the artifacts, the other social or natural worlds. A tool that many designers are now acquainted with is the so-called futures count, which assesses any alternative future in two variables, likelihood and time horizon. However, the imagination or thought about such futures is also the result of a political process, one that defines and is defined in a duality from and to those who do the thinking. In the case of expert designers, it is easy to come up with things that are likely to be implemented when they are aimed at maintaining the status quo. From my perspective, this would be the main conundrum faced by designers willing to facilitate plural futures. I move now to the second part of this paper. As I mentioned earlier, there are already many in the design discourse working on describing ways to approach a design practice that is compatible with plural futures. I want to ground an ought-to-be design on what others have already said. The first approach comes from participation as a practice space that looks at design in its future dimension, as a political act. The material in this political act plays a role in concealing what comes next. So a practice of design that opens futures should put materiality as an answer to the values of many and move away from the predetermination of what pays, profit making. The second approach implies a recognition that all material things are an infrastructure for a social world. So designers should ensure that whatever material form, visual or product, is the result of a social discussion aimed at the coexistence of multiple actors in a dynamic negotiation of their agencies. A third approach is about the scope of design interventions and their effect in larger systems. Particularly in system design, there is an orientation towards the future that considers how specific interventions at a smaller scale can have larger consequences. And because of complexity and dynamic behaviors, some systems can never be fully mapped, which means that designing for them requires an awareness about unanticipable effects and trade-offs. The fourth and final approach is about world building in a discursive or imaginary way. It is through narratives and expectations that people share their story about the future and how things become possible. In summary, what I wanted to say is that there is an open invitation for designers to open futures, or else to facilitate the integration of pluralities. However, it is not without problems, as designers also operate within particular modes of doing, driven to the creation of novelties as the sign of the future and as an advantage for profit generation. From this exploration, I put together two conclusions. One, futures in design cannot be only assessed by a perceived likelihood in a time horizon, because it ignores the politics of making futures and the control exerted by the status quo. And second, some approaches to integrate design and future opening have already been described in previous and very diverse literature about and from design. These approaches, which I try to put under 4 themes, are not mutually exclusive. Finally, I present 5 aspects to consider by designers wanting to pluralize the future: power issues, the extent of the effects of design interventions, artifacts as infrastructures, And the story is told to support the future and, of course, the doings of designers under multiple confrontations. However, these are, of course, not my particular ideas, but instead pieces of what already exists in the design discourse. Personally, I consider that design requires to move away from industrial and modernist values. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, very good. I think we listened very interesting research results, even if some of them are preliminary results, because some of the PhD students presenting the papers are actually at the beginning of their research studies. So, but anyhow, the focus on these topics and problems and issues concerning design and social aspects of design are really, really interesting. So now we have something like 30 minutes for a discussion, and maybe we can start with some questions that we can see in the chat. And then maybe we can have a more general discussion and conclusion altogether. So we have a couple of questions for June, the first presentation. The first one is from Muriel. Do you think, the question is for June, do you think or maybe going to investigate if it is ethical to use shame within design?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and it pops up as something that's kind of natural to reflect upon. I think there's a distinction between maybe ethics and morale that we're not so used to working with as designers. Some things are ethically wrong, some things are more up to be questioned as some morale or values that are more culturally contingent or yeah. So definitely an area to explore. It's a difficult and tricky area as well, because I think if you look into kind of activist movements or like bigger social changes when it comes to social injustice in terms of gender or race or religion or whatever, there's always some kind of what do you call it, like I only know the Norwegian word, but complicated or complex, or like a bit like borderline between what is right or wrong. So I'm moving, like questioning what is right or wrong. But I think it's possible to do it as a researcher without actually doing something that is perceived as very wrong. That made an answer.
Mm-hmm. Of course, this is a very interactive discussion, so please feel free to open your mic and comment.
So are you maybe planning to investigate if it's ethical or not? And if you are, how are you going to do how are you going to do that? It's a very difficult question, I know. So
yeah. So I guess, like, of course there are genres or like literature within design that talks about ethical design as well, especially when it comes to technology and what kind of technology do you introduce into society and how that kind of shapes society. Also, like Isaac was talking about, how like design is shaping the environment, what kind of futures you're designing for. It's a very broad discussion. I think it's also interesting to go a bit beyond design literature and look into philosophy. I'm sure there's a lot of good philosophers in my university that you can have good discussions with as well. It's difficult. I think either way, how much literature you read or how many people you talk to is going to be very difficult to get to a clear right or wrong. If you look into politics, the big discussions about the future, sustainability, there's a lot of ethical dilemmas going on there. So maybe it's not about for designers to necessarily know the final answer, but to be able to navigate and contribute into the discussion.
I think it's such a difficult question because it's more like a philosophical thing. But I think you can direct designers towards this is more kind of wrong and this is more kind of right.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are also, I think that's one thing. One thing is also to maybe direct designers to not always take for granted what is right or wrong when you do things, because I think designers are very well taught to design for very pleasurable experiences. And I'm not saying that we should design for something that's unpleasurable, but in a bigger social context, sometimes there might be a greater good. So that also kind of ethic discussion that goes on an individual level versus a social level or national or even international level could be quite different.
Okay, so we have another question about for June as well, about some more insights towards the relation between shame and stigma. Do you see shame as a part of the construct stigma, or is it a consequence resulting from stigma, or maybe leads to stigma? This is from Tina.
Also a very good question. It touches upon the whole, I think, the typology of shame and stigma and taboo and embarrassment and guilt. I see that also Isaac asked about the difference between guilt and shame. I think how I read it is that shame is being treated as an emotion, while stigma is maybe more being treated as a social concept. So there are a bit of difference, like definitely shame is very connected to stigma, as I've kind of read different definitions of stigma. At the same time, you also have words like shaming people or putting stigma on others, where the individual's own perception of how shameful they feel might not be the exact emotion. So it's difficult because we use these words in our everyday speech very differently from how we use it maybe in literature from psychology, and also it's being used quite rhetorically in kind of political discourse as well to access a bit of power. It could be putting national shame on countries or putting stigma on certain groups. Sorry, I'm going really broad again. I think the answer is yes, they're connected, but we're using the words in itself differently. How we feel it as an individual could be different, and also how we kind of use this together as social beings sometimes is a bit different, but definitely connected, very tightly connected.
Tina, would you like to add anything? Or I don't know. I don't see. Okay.
It is possible for everyone to share their audio and video now.
Yeah, because I don't see. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can move to a couple of questions for Muriel. So the first one is about your methodology, and if you have already considered, or you think that you are going to consider cultural differences between the participants, because the interpersonal distance would be different between cultures, and so we think that this should be taken into account. And there is another topic that you mentioned, the haptic interaction, and you said it's not very common that you start interacting haptically with people the first time you meet them, but in perspective, maybe it's also interesting to address haptic interaction.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo, for your question. Indeed, Fiske indicated that there are cultural differences, but for the purpose of my my study, my article, I did not take this into account because I think it's more the task of the researcher who is going to apply one of the research methods that I gave in my article to investigate cultural differences. So I basically made an overview of the methods, and the researcher who is going to apply one of those methods will need to investigate the cultural differences. I hope that's an answer to your question.
Lorenzo, would you like to, are you satisfied? Okay, I don't know, we don't see. There is another question for Muriel. Did you evaluate each method using the same categories, for example, cost, time? And were you able to identify a best method? Or is it possible to identify the best method?
In the overview, I addressed some pros and some cons of all the research methods. And those were indeed mostly cost and time. Sometimes there were some other categories such as the accuracy or something, and I addressed them in the overview. I don't think I can choose a best method. There are a lot of variables to take in mind, such as cost and time and accuracy and privacy, other limitations, and it will depend on the requirements of the research that is focused on.
And Muriel, there is this other question from Isaac. By framing unexpected reactions, what are you trying to control? You mentioned that in the presentation.
I don't think we are trying to control anything. I don't really understand the question. You're not really trying to...
Maybe Isaac, can you rephrase it or specify your question a little bit more? Isaac, we cannot hear you. You should open your mic. It disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe.
Trying to reconnect.
Yes.
I'm gonna join you because my microphone is not working.
Surprise. 2 in 1. Okay.
Yeah, well, when you were talking, you said that you have these two sets at the very beginning of methods. Those in the lab that are controlled and those that are in the wild, as you called. So, and you said that you wanted to be in the wild because you want to meet these unexpected reactions. So I'm wondering, what's the outcome of having unexpected reactions? If that's because you want to have access to something specific that you would like to control or assess afterwards for some specific goals or reasons. So that's just my question. What are you trying to control?
We don't really want to control anything. What we try to do is, during this unexpected encounter, we try to investigate what is going on, what is happening. So are the bystanders avoiding, or are they approaching? Are they making some kind of gestures, or how are they looking at the user of the wearable product? We are not trying to control anything. We are trying to observe what's going on.
So maybe what you are saying is that you are trying to do more a descriptive, elementary science kind of research instead of doing something more applied, that we will end up with something that will say, for example, principles to have people look at or interact with these technologies in this specific way. So is that what I'm understanding? Is that right?
Yes, I think so. So we don't really want to induce something. We don't want to bias people in natural environments. We kind of want to see their reactions towards the user of the product. We don't bias the bystanders.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, Isaac, can you stay here? Isaac?
Yeah.
Sorry, there is a question from you, from Maria, and then you have a question for Maria, so stay there. So Maria asks, as designers guide the design process and in so they decide what to design or what is design problem or not. Do you think is it possible for them not to colonize or lead towards deciding what futures are possible?
I think this
is a complex question. Yeah,
that's a very complex question, and I think there's a lot of research on that, because even people proposing alternative practice of design, alternative practices or alternative modes of doing design, that's what they are trying to find out, how to do design that is not colonizing or that is not being prescriptive in a way, but that instead gives flexibility to all these unanticipated things that could happen that are not known. But that's, but I think I don't have the answer, sadly, and I think maybe there will be an answer if we wait, I don't know, 50 years and see what happens to design in this period, in the education and in the practice of design itself. So I don't have an answer, but that's what I can say for now.
Mm-hmm. And I have a question for you. The talk and the topic is really very interesting. And you mentioned expert designer, but of course we have also young designers. Do you think you need to somehow design the curricula and the studies and education of these young designers to address this topic of open futures?
Yeah, I think that's something that actually I think not only I, because there is a lot of people and there is a lot of different ways of all these emerging designs. You probably are familiar with the work of Ezio Mancini and all these ideas of design for social innovation, design for sustainability, transition design, also the people from Carnegie Mellon. So you have all these different names of different practices, or design activism. So you have all these practices that are that some of them have a longer trajectory, you could say, even coming from the 50s or the 60s, the past century. But still, the modes of design are still pretty much concealed in the corporate world, in the industrial world. So maybe that movement will also come from what's taught at the level of the schools, but that's not something that I'm researching at the moment. So that's something that I think that I have read. So it's not not what I'm involved in.
But it's an important topic, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you have a question for Laura. Laura, you discuss strategies of design towards positive outcomes. What is the role of conflict in MSI?
This is a nice question. What I was thinking about is that initially the conflict is related to these interactions because it's what causes the avoidance of interactions in the first place. Like when you, for example, if we put ourselves in the context of some migrants arriving to a country, maybe locals won't feel comfortable with thinking or feeling threat about maybe my culture will change, for example. So there is an intercultural conflict in there that originates an avoidance. And at the end, the outcome of meaningful social interactions in the context of intercultural contact, it's to promote, like to learn to live with difference at the end, and to learn to live with that cultural conflict that is potential, but that it's only natural in a society that is multicultural, let's say.
Maybe I can add to that, because I'm thinking that when for example, I'm a foreigner also. I'm from Costa Rica and I'm living in Norway. So, and I know there are some conflicts that live with me, that I have. It's me conflicting with the society, and I don't bring them up like in a violent way, but they are still there. And when there is something very positive, maybe I'm just hiding that this conflict is living with me and is affecting me and it's putting me in a bad situation. But but they don't come in this. They don't come in my general or interactions with others. But maybe they stay there, and not only with me. I mean, with many other foreigners. So that's why I'm asking what happens to those hidden, or the things that you say that are avoided in the interactions, because you are only interacting in the positive way. So maybe this never come to surface.
Yeah, like for example, that is something that is criticized of this theory of intergroup contact theory, because you only look like the positive now, because the thing is, like, you can also learn from negative experiences and negative interactions, but we also want to avoid them and to learn, or there is like because there is a negative outcome from some interactions, but at the end those can also teach you something. But I guess that the word conflict is better in that sense than positive or negative, because conflict is not necessarily a negative thing. It's something that you can get more things out from. And it allows you, for both parties, to adapt and to change instead of just looking all the time for positive things, I guess.
Good. And Isaac is also asking something to Akira. Akira, can you hear us? Yes. I was wondering if you have labeled your assessment of insights as an algorithmic process. If so, is there an ethical exercise in treating humans as insight machines? This is a very tricky question.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the evaluation of insight statements is not algorithmic, and it is like professor evaluating a student's performance in a lecture, something like that. It makes sense.
Isaac, does it make sense?
Yeah, but you're mentioning professors evaluating students, for example. I think that also follows a process of I mean, an assessment. You would say maybe probably the professors don't do it; they are biased and they take specific pieces and they move everywhere. But you always have an entrance point and an input. This document that you get, and then you evaluate it as good or bad, because you also mentioned that. And I was thinking if that was moral. So and that's why I'm asking if there is an ethical exercise, because if you have a process like to evaluate things as good or bad by having it I don't know, averaged of several people participating, maybe you will end up with something like the oppression of the majorities, that you will have these things that you think are good to do because all these people say or evaluate them as good, and algorithmically they are correct. But are they? Have you engaged in this kind of ethical exercise at least?
Maybe evaluation axis is not exist, so there is a need to identify how the professors evaluate such insight statements or the activities of students, and I think it's not it's like assess the students' behavior, and it is not engage students to what professors think or what professors imagine how the I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't worry. I think it's a difficult question, but I think it would be good for you if you engage in also thinking what's the ethical part of the of the process that you are proposing. That may be very good, but then you need to tweak it to also think what could be the unanticipated situations or outcomes that could come from what you are proposing.
Thank you.
Maybe I will return the space to you.
By the way, at Politecnico, students evaluate professors, so this is it's good. So there is, I think, another question for you, Akira, and this is from Maria Laura. You have found patterns of thought through which designers create insights. Do you think it is possible to change these patterns? And if so, what would be the purpose of influencing the cognitive process?
Actually, I only identify the bad trends. However, I believe it is possible to change the process like think, and it is useful in avoiding what would be a biased thinking. This would allows them like students to define deeper user needs. So maybe it is possible.
Okay, thank you. There are still a couple of questions for June. Okay. Your topic seems very interesting. There are questions about the distinction between shame, guilt, and embarrassment. Is there a distinction, or are they part of the same ontology? And also there is a question about the relation between shame and social pressure as a technique used in design for behavior change.
So, first of all, yeah, there's a distinction between shame, guilt, and embarrassment. They often go together as this kind of self-conscious emotions. They're negative. Usually, the differ between shame and guilt is that shame or guilt relies on an action. So you feel bad for having done something bad, while shame goes more into that you feel bad because you are something bad. So it's more kind of inwards directed to your own identity, whilst guilt is more related to an action that you have done. But of course, this can go together. And embarrassment, I think, usually is also used mostly when there's a social audience present. So you usually don't feel embarrassed if you are all by yourself, but you can feel shame while you're all by yourself. But then again, as mentioned before, this typology of how these words are being used both within research and literature, but also how it's being used within design, but also how we use it in our everyday speak, which I put a lot of emphasis on, is how we talk about this online or with your friends, or saying that, oh, that felt a bit awkward or that felt a bit embarrassing, could be actually that you felt guilty, but then you said you felt embarrassing. So as a designer, when you're trying to read the world around you, you need to also look at how people articulate it themselves, and not only how it kind of goes into theory. So that's a lot of my work, is also to try to interlink theoretical frameworks with how these emotions are kind of articulated either verbally or visually in our everyday life. So yeah, that was the first one. The second one was social pressure and shame. Definitely, yeah, if you look at, I think especially now, because we live in such a kind of visual culture, like everything is, even we're online, right? We have our LinkedIn profiles, we have Facebook profiles, there's like information is being spread so much more quickly. We get knowledge and information in different ways, and it's much more easier to also cancel people or call out people for behaving badly. So shame is a very moral emotion, in the sense that if you put shame on someone, you're also telling them that they're doing something wrong or they're doing something bad, which is, I think, a lot of literature goes into how shame is a very kind of important social emotion. A lot of, when you look at shame in terms of stigma, it's more maybe related to harmful and damage. But definitely social pressure, I think, is even all back to kind of philosophy and punishment and Foucault and all these things, like it's shame and taboos are being talked about as a way of putting social pressure or punishing individuals to avoid certain behaviors. So there's not very much, as I've come across, literature within design or how you use shame as a social pressure. There's one article on a waste management system where you put in the waste on social media, which is one attempt to do on it. Yeah. Sorry, a lot of talk.
Okay, it's good. Thank you. So we have some few minutes left, and I've seen that, of course, most of your studies and research has to do with the study of users, of humans, their behaviors, and so on. And I've seen that technology can help in many of your studies. So my question is a general question. Do you think technology is today good enough for doing that? Maybe because we have no time, but yes, I asked Muriel, who is using a lot of technology, and she presented some of the technologies that she has used for the studies. Do you think technology is good enough? Can you maybe give input to technology developers to develop other kind of technologies or support that you may need?
Yes, I think technology is already very, very far, but I think there can be a lot of improvements. For example, one of the research methods that I mentioned in my presentation was a face reader, but it has a lot of limitations and restrictions, because you have to be in front of the camera, you can turn your head left and right. So I think if we make these kind of technologies more dynamic, we could use them in like a really unnatural environment, uncontrolled natural environment. And I think, yes, making these kind of technologies more flexible, that would be the right way to go to improve.
Yes, because we've seen that technology is affordable. It's not, the cost is not so high, because it comes from the game industry. So it's quite cheap and affordable for universities. And so maybe the use of technology helps a lot, because instead of using only traditional ways for that, used for user studies like questionnaires, you can detect and get data in different ways, so that could help. Okay, I think time is over, and I would like to congratulate, because all your research studies are really very good, interesting, and we hope to see in the next events also organized by the Design Society, the progresses of your research. And thank you again, and enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye bye.